Biden administration is shutting down one of the migrant detention centers that houses, or I should say detains, migrant girls. So these are minors and the conditions are so awful that they had no choice but to shut it down. Now, how awful are the conditions at this facility in Houston? Well, ABC News reports that sources familiar with the facility's operation said the girls housed there, ages 13 to 17, were at times instructed to use plastic bags for toilets because there were not enough staff members to accompany them to restrooms, which I think is all fine and dandy in this country where we have massive corporations that literally force their employees to urinate in bottles because they're not allowed to take bathroom breaks. So we're just training them for the workforce here in the United States. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that, guys? Obviously, I'm being sarcastic, but we also learned that there's a lack of outdoor space and that meant that girls spent most of the day on makeshift cots surrounded by boxes intended to offer some semblance of privacy. The facility also suffered from overcrowding and failed to comply with pandemic-related distancing measures. There were about 500 girls in that detention center. They're now being moved out into other detention centers. And this ABC News video has some more details on what those centers look like.
They were more treated like merchandise rather than treated as human beings.
This migrant rights advocate toured the warehouse 2 weeks ago and was troubled by what he saw.
The girls were not allowed to get up unless it was to shower or to use the restroom. Even their meals were delivered to their cots.
The administration contracted the National Association of Christian Churches to run the site. They specialize in disaster relief, not caring for migrant kids. And this morning, there are serious questions about how this group was awarded a $4 million government contract in the first place. A lawyer for the church group tells ABC News the administration, including Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra, personally requested their services and that they did what they could do to help under the direction of HHS. As for the girls, many now relocated to other shelters like this one in Carrizo Springs, Texas. Others reunited with their family.
Now, this is a growing issue at the border where unaccompanied minors are essentially being forced to remain in these detention facilities when in reality, many of them arrive with information about family members or sponsors within the country that they can go to. But that would require resources. It would require more manpower in order to go through the necessary checks before placing these children with these sponsors or with these family members. And we have a broken government that refuses to do it. So instead, we play musical chairs and put these children in one awful detention facility to the next. That's what's happening at the border. That's it. That's what's happening.
Yeah. So there's one part of this story that you should know the full context for. So that Christian church organization, their denials about them asking for this contract was pretty convincing to me. It sounded like they really meant it when they were, because they gave specific details that were credible about how the Biden administration asked them to do it. They even said, "Look, we didn't have any experience in this. This just landed on our footsteps. We didn't want it, right?" And so. It sounded credible to me. So it seems like it's more of a screw up of the Biden administration than that particular organization. So just wanted everybody to have that full context. Now, in terms of what they should do, look, I don't want people thinking this is an easy issue. I always remember Trump coming out and saying, healthcare, no one knew it was this complicated. And look, when unaccompanied minors show up in America, it is complicated. There are a couple of different factors. You got to follow the law, and you don't want them coming by themselves. On the other hand, when they do, you can't just send them back, etc. Right? Now, and there's still relatively young administration, right? It hasn't even been 100 days yet. So I understand all of that, but to me, it seems like I always want to be constructive. And one thing that makes sense to me is get them to the sponsors as quickly as possible. And we've got to have a better sponsor system. So the right wing says, oh, well, if you give them to family members or sponsors, you never see them again. First of all, that's not true. We've shown you the stats. I think it's about 83% come back for their court proceedings. But we could have a system that's has more checks and balances on the sponsors, so that we can get that 83% up to 95%, or just a number we're all more comfortable with. Like there should be some degree of consequences if the kids don't come back for hearings that they're supposed to have, etc. Right? That's the right way to do it. Trying to hold them in government facilities for any period of time, is almost never going to work. It's going to create situations where you're worried that the girls are going to go move around, in which case it's harder to track them. And what if there's sexual assault? Oh my God, that's a nightmare. But if you don't have them move around, then you have them cooped up in a box, right? There's a lot of no wins there. Let's get them the sponsors as quickly as we can.
Well, I also think it's a problem when you're communicating that unaccompanied minors will be allowed into the country and go through the proceedings, but families arriving to the border will be turned back. So if you're a parent in one of these Latin American countries who's incredibly desperate to get your children to safety as a result of, by the way, US foreign policy that has completely destroyed and ravaged those countries, well then you're gonna take that risk. You're gonna send your child to safety unaccompanied. Wouldn't it be better to actually have a policy in place? Like the half measures with the Biden administration, and we saw this with the Obama administration as well, do not work. Stop trying to straddle the desires of the GOP and then what progressives want. You gotta commit to one or the other. And so what he's trying to do here is say, no, I'm a hardliner when it comes to families arriving at the border. Okay, well then people are gonna send unaccompanied minors because they're desperate. No parent does that because they're bad people. No parent does that because they enjoy doing that. They do it because they're desperate. But we wouldn't have an unaccompanied minor problem if we had a clear policy on what to do with asylum seeking families, because really that's what's at the heart of this. He did not reverse what Trump did in banning asylum seekers during the pandemic. He's just continuing on with that policy.
Yeah, I just want to add two good points that Anna made there. Number one, so Republicans look at that and go, okay, then turn them all back. That the solution is turn back the kids too. Let them go back through the desert and through that perilous journey with coyotes. At that point, coyotes can't get paid, so they wouldn't even have any guidance. Good luck walking back to Guatemala, okay? That's the Republican solution. Our solution is no, accept the families as well. That doesn't mean they get to stay. That's why I talk about having a great sponsor program that if folks are released into the country and they don't come back for their hearings, there should be some significant consequences. But in return, we can treat people humanely when they arrive here. So there is a better way to do this, but Biden is trying to split the baby, and almost literally at this point. And you're not gonna win any Republican votes. How many times can we say this? It's not the 1990s. There are no Republicans to win over, they're gone. So middle ground approach, all it does is cost you more of your base voters. If I was gonna say if the only thing you care about is politics, but of course the only thing they care about is politics. And because if you cared about it in terms of policy, obviously you would accept the families, not permanently, but so that they can get a hearing. And last thing that Anna mentioned, look, I got kids. A lot of you out there have kids. How desperate would you have to be to send your kids on a journey of hundreds and hundreds of miles, and sometimes with coyotes who are like really bad guys? How desperate would you have to be? You think anybody does that out of, who cares? Indifference? No, they love their kids just like we do. And you gotta be incredibly desperate to do that. That's how bad the situation is. That's what we gotta wake up to.
You know what's interesting, because I was curious, what was different about Cuban amnesty, right? Because Cubans, after the Cuban Revolution, were granted amnesty in the United States. And everything just goes back to foreign policy, guys. It's kind of incredible. They were hoping that the US government was hoping that they could use Cubans to fight Fidel Castro in Cuba. Like go to war and reverse the revolution. That's what it was about. But the government doesn't see a use for migrant families seeking asylum. So that's really the cold hard truth of what's happening at the border. And it's really frustrating to see the Biden administration get so concerned about what Republicans have to say about him, what the corporate media has to say about him. He's not winning any favors, either from the left or the right, on this issue by trying to straddle that line. And he's failing pretty tremendously on this issue.
Yeah, and he's giving in a Republican talking points like calling it a crisis, etc. There's just no strength there. There's nonstop triangulation, and it's not going to work. All it's going to do is get him in trouble. It's not good policy. It's not good politics, and I don't know that Biden's got it in him to turn around. So expect more of this trying to muddle through with half measures, especially that refugee cap that we covered last week. adopting Trump's brutal refugee cap, what, to get 0 Republican voters? Nah, it's in Biden's DNA to go wherever the Republicans are, to meet them halfway, no matter how draconian the Republicans are. And it's not smart politics. It puts all of us in grave danger, because that makes it more likely that a very right-wing, and I'm worried fascist Republican will win the next time around, because all we're doing is appeasement.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.